this is William Brister with SkySwitch University. And in this session, we want to cover how to spoof outbound caller ID. So the scenario is that you have a customer that's coming on board, you're converting the customer, and you're going to port the numbers for this customer. So let's say you have a main number that you want to port. And the caller ID spoofing comes into play when you have a customer, you're doing the conversion, and you want to, you're going to port the number, but you want to go ahead and convert the customer over so that you can get the outbound calling working. You register the phones, you get the outbound caller working, outbound calling working. Then you're going to call forward from their current carrier. From their main number into a temporary DID on the domain, and so that you have that temporary time that you can have inbound calls working, you can have outbound calls working. But the one key thing is that the customer wants to be able to use his main number for outbound caller ID, during that time. So that's the one key, that you have to put in place in order for it to work. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to Manage DIDs, and we're going to use the BYOT function, which is designed for bringing your own telecom or bringing your own termination. And this is how those resellers that are using their own carriers would upload their numbers. But we're going to use this functionality to get the number into the system in order to then spoof the outbound caller ID. All right, so I've got a spreadsheet set up here. And I'll pull that spreadsheet over. Now what I'm doing is I've set up a spreadsheet, but I've saved it as a CSV. So this is the main number that I want to get into the system, into the platform, so I can spoof the outbound caller ID. So you'll see we want to put a 1 in front, and we want to put it in a single column. So if you had multiple numbers, you could put them in the single column. All right, so then I'm going to want to upload that file. I've saved that file to my desktop. Okay, so I needed to save that file, but here's the file that I'm uploading. Here's the number, so I will add all phone numbers. Okay, and then close, and then I can look for that number. And here it is. Okay, so it's showing up as a BYOT number. That's just a identifier, that you've uploaded it that way. But now that the number is in my inventory in my DID portal here, then I can then manage that number. The first thing I want to do is I want to route the number down into the domain that I want to use, that I want to spoof the caller ID on. So I'm going to put it into this domain, and I'm just going to leave. I'm not going to assign it to any subscriber at the moment or any type of treatment, because I'm going to set that later for that main number. But for now, I just want to get it down in the domain so I can spoof the outbound caller ID. So I'm going to apply it. The other thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and set my emergency address information on that number, because since I'm going to use it as outbound caller ID, I'm going to need that number to, I'm going to use it as my outbound E911 caller ID information as well. So I'll get my emergency address information here, and I'll validate the address. Okay, I have success, so I'm going to apply this to the number. So now I have assigned the number down to the domain, and I have set the emergency address information on that number. So now I can go down into my domain, and I'm going to, you'll see that that number is now in inventory on my domain. Okay, so now I can go on to any particular user, and I can set the outbound caller ID information to that number. Now, since I pushed it into inventory, it's the only number available in the inventory, so it's already showing up there in my outbound caller ID. So, and I'm going to set it as my outbound 911 caller ID as well. Okay, so this is how I take a main number of a customer, put it in the DID portal, assign it down to the domain that I want, and then I can then assign it as outbound caller ID and outbound 911 caller ID on a particular user, and I can do that on all the users, in that domain. Now I want to point something out here as well. If in fact you have a company that also wants to spoof the outbound caller ID, let's say on multiple DIDs. All the users want to use their own outbound caller ID on their DID. So it's not just the main number, but you have multiple DIDs. So in that case, you will go to the inventory. There's a different way of entering the number into the PBX. Okay, so if you're going to have multiple DIDs, this is the way you want to do it. You want to go to the inventory at the reseller account level, and you want to add the number here. So let's say I had a number, a DID in that domain for one of the users, and they wanted to use their outbound caller ID on that number until the number ports. Okay, so this is how I'll enter the number in. I'll leave it as available, and I'll click Save. Okay, so now as I go back into domains and back to that domain, go back to users, we'll say that this test user 100 is the user that wants to use that number now as the outbound caller ID. So as I've put it into the PBX, now it displays. And so now I would be able to use it as the outbound caller ID for that particular user until the number ports. And then I could still use my 655-4000 main number as the 911 caller ID, because that's the number I put the emergency address information on. Okay, so these numbers haven't ported yet, but this is a way of entering the numbers in the system so that I can spoof outbound caller ID. So again, if you have a customer that has a main number, put it in through the DID portal, and then assign it to the domain, and then you can use it as the outbound caller ID on any of the users in the domain. But if you have users that want their particular DIDs to use for outbound caller ID spoofing, then you'll need to enter those numbers just through the PBX. Now you may ask the question, well, why don't I just enter all the numbers through the PBX just like I did the 4001 number? Well, the reason is because on the main number I want to apply the emergency address information, because I want to use it as the 911 caller ID outbound, as well. So, and the only place that you could put the emergency address information on a number is in the DID portal. But our practice in our support is that we do not want you to put many numbers in the DID portal. Only put the number, like the main number, in the DID portal that you also want to put emergency address information on. If you don't need emergency address information, then you would just put the numbers in through the managed PBX, just like we did with the 4001 number. Okay, so this is how you spoof outbound caller ID. If you have any questions, you can open a ticket at support@skyswitch.com or through your ticket link here in your dashboard. Thank you very much for attending. Bye.